We continue now at the top of Daf Dalet Amud Aleph in Meseches Sotah. This is Sotah Daf 4a. The Gemara continues with the Tosefta V'kama Shir Stira. How long is the amount of time that's considered going into seclusion? Kedei Tumah, it's the amount of time it takes to be defiled, to commit the act of adultery. Kedei Bia, which is the amount of time it takes for the actual act of adultery. Kedei Hara, which really means to say the amount of time for the beginning of the act of adultery. Kedei HaKafas Dekel, and it's the same amount of time as going around a dekel, going around a palm tree. Rashi explains Kedei Tumah, Umahu Kedei Tumah. What does it mean, Kedei Tumah? Kedei Bia means Kedei Bia. Umahu Kedei Bia. What does Kedei Bia mean? It means Kedei Hara. It means the beginning of the act of Bia. Dahainu Neshikas Aver, that's when the Aver, the Avarim actually touch Bo'oso Makam at that particular place. Bekama Shiura Kedei HaKafas Dekel, and how much is that shear? The amount it takes to go, Shiyuchal Adam Leilech Svivos Dekel, the amount it takes for a person to go around a palm tree. Ulakaman Mefarish, later on the Gemara will explain, Lamali Lemisni Kulan, why do we have to say all of these different explanations of the shear? Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Eliezer says, Kedei Mezigas HaKos, it's the amount of time to dilute a cup of wine. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Kedei Lishasoso, Rabbi Yoshua says it's the amount of time to drink the wine. Ben Azai Omer Kedei Litzlos Beitzer, Ben Azai says it's the amount of time to roast an egg. Rabbi Akiva Omer Kedei Lagomer, Rabbi Akiva says it's the amount of time to swallow the egg. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Kedei Ligmoa Shalosh Beitzim Zu Achar Zu, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says it's the amount of time to swallow 3 eggs, one after the other. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yirmiyah Omer Kedei Likshor Gardi Nima, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yirmiyah says it's the amount of time it takes for a weaver to tie a string. Chanin ben Pinchas Omer Kedei Shetoshet Yoda Lasoch Pia Litol Kisam. Chanin ben Pinchas says it's the amount of time it takes a woman to put her hand into her mouth to take out a toothpick. Pelimo Omer, and Pelimo says Kedei Shetoshet Yoda Lasal Litol Kikar. It's the amount of time it takes for her to put her hand into a basket to take out a loaf of bread. And even though there's no proof that that's the amount of time, there is a hint to it in the pasuk. This is a pasuk from Mishlei. The pasuk says Ki ba'ad ishazon ad kikar lechem. Pasuk mentions ishazon nus, and it also talks about a loaf of bread. And the Gemara continues, V'chol hani lamli. Now, why do I need all of these different explanations of the shear of stira? And the Gemara says, Sricha, we need them all. The itana kedei tumah, because if it only said kedei tumah, hava amina kedei tumasa v'artzosa. So I would have thought it includes the amount of time of defilement, but also the amount of time that he has to appease her, that he has to convince her to have relations with him. Kamash malon. So that's why it's teaching us kedei bia, that we're only concerned that they go into seclusion for the amount of time of the actual act of bia. V'itana kedei bia, and if it only said kedei bia, hava amina kedei gemar bia, I would say that it has to be the amount of time to complete the act of relations. Kamash malon kedei hara. That's why it says the Tosefta Kedei Ha'ara means the beginning of the act of relations, enough time to complete the beginning part, that is enough time. And the Gemara continues, V'iyash minan Kedei Ha'ara, and if it only said Kedei Ha'ara, have amina Kedei Ha'ara v'artzosa. Again, I would have thought it's Kedei Ha'ara, the amount of time of the beginning of Bia and Artzosa, and also appeasing or convincing her. Kamash malon Kedei Tumah, that's why it says Kedei Tumah. V'kama Kedei Ha'ara, and then finally the Tosefta says, how long, how much time is Kedei Ha'ara? Kedei HaKafas Dekel, it's the amount of time to go around a palm tree. And the Gemara continues, Uramini, we have the following contradiction from a Tosefta. Vinistra v'kama shir stira, it says in the pasuk Vinistra, and what is the shir, what is the amount of time of seclusion? Lo shamana, we don't know what that amount of time is. Kishu omer v'hi nitzma, since the pasuk says v'hi nitzma, havi omer kedei tumah, we assume that it means kedei tumah, kedei bia, kedei hara, kedei chazor asdekel. It's the amount of time of defilement, the amount of time of the act of relations, of the beginning of the act of relations, and the amount of time of the return of the palm tree. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, that's the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Kedei Mezigas HaKos. Rabbi Yoshua says it's the amount of time to dilute a cup of wine. Ben Azai Omer Kedei Lishto. So Ben Azai says the amount of time to drink it. Rabbi Akiva Omer Kedei Litzlos Beitzer. Rabbi Akiva says the amount of time to roast an egg. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer Kedei Lagomen. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says the amount of time to swallow the egg. Now, right now, says the Gemara, we think that hakafas dekel, going around the palm tree, is the same thing as chazaras dekel, which is the returning of the palm tree. And so the Gemara asks the first of the contradictions. Hasam amar Rabbi Yishmael kedei hakafas dekel. Over there, Rabbi Yishmael said that it's the amount of time of going around the palm tree. That's what we said in the Bryce at the top of the Amud. Upolig Rabbi Eliezer alen. Rabbi Eliezer argues on Rabbi Yishmael. And hacha over here, amar Rabbi Eliezer kedei chazaras dekel. Here in this Bryce, Rabbi Eliezer says says Kedei Chazaras Dekel, and so therefore he suddenly seems to be agreeing and not arguing with Rabbi Yishmael. And the Gemara answers, Amar Abaya, Abaya says, Hakafa beregel. Hakafa means you walk around the tree with your feet. Chazara beruach. Chazara actually means that the branch is blowing in the wind and it returns to its place. So they're two separate shiurim. Boy, Ravashi asks, Chazar beruach ki hechi da'azel v'hadarasi. When we say that the branch returns to its place, does it mean it blows in the wind and then goes back one time to where it came from? Or maybe what it means is the branch has to stop moving totally. It continues to shake back and forth, and only when it completely stops from shaking, that's the amount of time that we say is the amount of time of seclusion. And the Gemara says to that, Teiku, the Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara asks another contradiction that we find between the two brises. Hasamam Rabbi Eliezer, Kedei Mezigas Sakos. Over there, Rabbi Eliezer says the amount of time to dilute a cup of wine. Hacha Kedei Chazaras Dekel. And here he says the amount of time for the palm branch to return. And the Gemara answers to that, Idi v'idi chad shiuruhu, will just say that both of those are actually the same shear. And another contradiction, Hasamam Rabbi Yoshua Kedei Lishto, so there Rabbi Yoshua says the amount of time to drink the wine, Hachamar Kedei Mezigas Akos, and here he says the amount of time to dilute the cup of wine. And the Gemara says to that, Eim Kedei Limzog V'Lishtos, we'll say that what he really means is you need both, the amount of time to dilute and to drink the wine. V'leima Idi v'idi chad shiuruhu, the Gemara says, why don't we answer instead that they're both the same exact shear, Lishtoso and Mezigas Akos are the same, but the problem with that, says the Gemara, would be, if that were the case, Hainu Rabbi Eliezer, that would make Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer identical, and we know that they are arguing. And the Gemara asks another contradiction. Hasamar ben Azai kedei litzlos beitza. Over there, Ben Azai said the amount of time to roast an egg. Hachamar kedei lishtoso. Here he says the amount of time to drink the wine. And the Gemara answers to that, Idi v'idi chad shiuruhu. Both of them are the same shiur. And the Gemara asks another contradiction. Hasamam Rabbi Akiva kedei lagoma. Over there, Rabbi Akiva says the amount of time to swallow the egg. Hachamar kedei litzlos beitza. And here he says the amount of time to roast the egg. Ema kedei litzlos beitza lagoma. So the Gemara answers what Rabbi Akiva really means is both. It's the amount of time to roast and swallow the egg. V'leima idi v'idi chad shiuruhu. So why doesn't the Gemara says, why don't we just answer that they're both actually the same shear? And the Gemara says similar to above, Imkain Hainu ben Azai. We can't say that because if so, that would be identical to the Shita ben Azai, and we know that they argue. The Gemara asks over there, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says the amount of time is the amount of time it takes to swallow 3 eggs, one after the other. And here he says it's the amount of time to swallow the egg. And the Gemara says, Lidvar of the Rabbi Akiva Kamar. Actually, what Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is doing is he's responding according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. He's not stating his own opinion. Because what did we just say above? We said according to Rabbi Akiva, it's the amount of time that it takes to roast and to swallow. And so now Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira responds to that and he says, Eimoshir gemia lechuda. Why are you using roasting and swallowing? I can tell you the same exact shear, but just use swallowing. And that would be kedei legameya shalosh beitzim zu achar zu. Instead of saying tzliya and gemia, you should have just said, he says to Rabbi Akiva, you should have just said the amount of time to swallow 3 eggs, one after the other. Dahainu tzliya gemia. That would be identical to the amount of time of roasting and swallowing. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. We said above, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yirmiyah, Omer Kadei Sheyikshor Gardi Nima. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yirmiyah says it's the amount of time for a weaver to tie a string. Boy, Ravashi asks, the Merachek or the Mekarev, are the 2 ends of the string that you're tying, are they far apart or are they close together? And the Gemara says, Teiku. The Gemara leaves that as a question. And Rashi said, the Merachek Shnei Rashi Hanima Hanifsakos Meruchakos Zemizet Ikashia Tvei. If they're far away from each other, then it takes a longer time. And the Gemara again says, Teiku. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Chanin ben Pinchas Omer Kedei Shetosh Yad L'Sochpi Lital Kisam. It's the amount of time for her to put her hand in her mouth and take out a wood chip, take out a toothpick. Boy, Ravashi asks, the Mahadek or the Lo Mahadek, are we talking about where this toothpick is stuck or not stuck? And the Gemara says, Teiku. The Gemara leaves that as a question. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. We said above, Plimo Amar Kedei Shetosh Yad L'Sal Lital Kikor. Plimo says it's the amount of time that she puts her hand into a basket to take out a loaf. Boy, Ravashi asks, the Mahadek or the Lo Mahadek, again, is it stuck or is it not stuck? Bechadata o batika, is it a new basket or an old basket? And Rashi says, Bechadata o batika sal yashan cholaku, the older one is smooth. V'noach lishtamish, it's easier to use, it comes out faster. So, and again, the Gemara continues to ask, Bechamima o bekrira, are we talking about a warm loaf of bread or a cold one? And Rashi says on that, Bekriro, Bechamima lechem cham nimach v'nishmat ben hayad, v'tzarach lotzio benachas v'shoa b'hotza. Also, when you have bread that's hot, so it slips in the hand, and you have to take it out carefully, slowly, so that's a longer amount of time. A cold one would be a shorter amount of time. And we continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Dalid Amud Beis.